Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and this is the Breaking Free Show. And I'm very delighted, as always, to have you join us today, wherever you are. A lot of us are in. I'm in. I'm usually, used to be anyway. I can't even say usually, because used to be is a long time ago at Amnon's doing the show, but now I'm doing it from home because of COVID. But we're just happy to be doing it together. Anyway, I'm honored that you're here, and each and every week we love to bring you stories, ideas, technology, philosophies, things maybe you agree with and some things that you may not agree with. But what I ask of you is that you just listen. And listening does not mean that you have to agree. It just means that you come to this show with an open mind, an open ear, an open heart, and just listen. And even if it's something that you are completely against or for, just listen. That's all we can ask. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm asking of you. Anyway, anytime during the show, you are more than welcome to call in. If you have a comment, a story that you want to share, 919-518-9773. Or you can also join us in our chats. Just put your name, nickname, whatever you like, under the window and just comment there. And you are also more than welcome to join us on Skype, and that would be Skype voice. So you will not be coming in as on a video, it will just be your voice. So please feel free to engage with us at computers, and that's the plural, and then the number 2K voice, computers 2K voice. So I want to say hi to Amnon, because without Amnon, the show would not be. So hi, Amnon.
Hi, Marilyn.
How are you?
I'm fine. You look
Good.
lovely.
Well, thank you. Pearls do me good. I like me, even though they're fake. I like me some pearls.
And happy Hanukkah.
Thank you. You too. Thank you. You too. It certainly is a time of lots of light that we're trying to shine all over the place. So let me go ahead and introduce my guests to you. They are returning, and that is an honor for us as well, because certain conversations are never done, and we have to keep on talking and sharing and understanding. So Carole and David are here once again. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. Back, exactly. Well, we have still more to talk about and learn. So let me just ask each of you to share about yourself and who you are, so our audience who have not met you before will know you a little bit. So let's start with Carole. Carole, you want to tell us a little about you?
Sure. And thank you very much for having us back. It's fun to talk to you, Marilyn. I am a sociologist. I live in the Bay Area in California. I actually work in a department of obstetrics and gynecology because I study women's health. For many years, I've focused particularly on the abortion conflict in the United States, and have written several books about abortion provision, including most recently with David. May I shamelessly self-promote or joint promote? David and I recently wrote a book called Obstacle Course: The Everyday Struggle to Get an Abortion in America.
Well, lovely, and I appreciate you being in here. And so, David?
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm David Cohen. I'm a law professor at Drexel University's Klein School of Law in Philadelphia. That's where I'm based. And I have been working in the field of reproductive rights and justice for a couple decades now, as a lawyer first, and now as a professor. And I study various aspects of abortion and abortion access in this country, and along with Carole, wrote the book she just shared, and wrote a book several years ago with another person named Kristen Conan about anti-abortion terrorism, the ways that abortion providers are targeted and harassed by anti-abortion extremists. And I'm excited to be back on the show with you. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate it. So one of the things I'd like to know, and I don't recall if we mentioned this the last time, but it serves to repeat it. Carole, what made you pick this area of study, abortion?
It really was a question of being in the right place at the right time. I started my career in the 70s, actually in Philadelphia, not far from where David is now. And I was a young sociologist. I was very interested in gender. I was very interested in how the women's movement of that time was affecting public policy. And I was teaching a course on gender and public policy. Some of my students, and this was in a school of social work, some of my students were getting jobs just as Planned Parenthood in Philadelphia was setting up its first abortion service. And they invited me to come down and observe. And it was so fascinating from a sociological point of view. What does it mean to take this issue that was the subject of so much social movement agitation, and now it has to become a healthcare service? So that's how I got into this field, and it's provided me 40 years worth of interesting things to observe and write about. It's just an extremely, extremely interesting subject, in part because of the conflict, in part because of many other things as well.
So we're going to get into as many of those things as we can. And one of the things that struck me, and I want David to share about himself, but one of the things that struck me, Carole, and I want to talk about it, is how you talk about gender now, because that's an interesting conversation as well. Because I went to do a talk about, gender in the workplace, and my hand got slapped from somebody in the audience and she was a millennial. She says, we don't talk about gender. And so I think it's an interesting, perspective. So I'd like to talk about that at some point too. So David, what about you? Why did you find yourself in this arena?
Somewhat similar story to Carole in the sense of right place, right time, because I started my career after law school working for an organization called the Women's Law Project, which is a nonprofit in Philadelphia. I had been very interested in gender and sex discrimination in college and law school, and I was very fortunate enough to get a job after law school working for an organization working on those issues. And several of the cases that they had at the time that I started working on were abortion-related cases. And it just flowed from there, because I found that the clients that I worked for were really just incredible, caring, dedicated people who wanted to provide the best care they possibly could to the patients who came to see them. But they were often, they still provided that great care, but they didn't provide it in the way they wanted because the state interfered with the best medical practices, which is what the states do all over the country. They interfere with best medical practices, and the state controls how abortion care is delivered rather than doctors and nurses and those who support them. So working for those people as their lawyer really made me feel like this was an important area of law, an important part of the world, because as they were the ones who taught me, what they do is about self-determination, what they do is about freedom, and giving people who come to them the ability to live the best lives that they want. And if I could help them by being a lawyer and now a researcher, although I still represent them in some cases, if I could help them in the ways that I had the expertise to, it felt like I was being an important part of this movement.
So was there anything in your personal lives that when you came upon this, you just you held on to it? Anything, Carole?
Frankly, no. 1 out of 4 American women will have an abortion, and I absolutely support them. And had I had an unwanted pregnancy, I would have looked for an abortion. It would have been hard for me because I came of age before Roe. But no, I didn't have an abortion, so it wasn't, but people I know did. And I remember from my college years how terrified people were if they had an unwanted pregnancy.
Right. Most definitely.
I think, as Carole mentioned, 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in their reproductive years. And I think that equates to, as someone in the movement says, Renee Bracey Sherman, everyone loves someone who's had an abortion. And it's just, you may not know it because a lot of people don't talk about it, but everyone loves someone who had an abortion. And everyone knows someone right now who wouldn't be in the place that they are in their lives if they hadn't had an abortion, because not getting an abortion derails people and derails their lives. And so part of it is knowing people who've had abortions. I'm sure part of it is my father's an OBGYN. He doesn't do abortions, but he does high risk pregnancy care. So it's, women's health care has been a part of my life since I've known anything. I've been able to listen to his conversations. So that's baked into who I am. But really it's to me, it's everything Carole and I have been talking about in terms of people being able to control their lives, and doing whatever it takes to do it.
So for those people who are against abortion, what's your normal commentary? What do you normally say just right out of the gate? So let's just get that out. Carole?
I mean, what do I say?
Yeah, what do you say to the people who are against abortion?
Well, there's a very nice bumper sticker that goes around that you see saying, if you don't like abortions, don't have one. I mean, that's one thing we could say, although that's a bit snarky. What I say is that people disagree about this, and we live in a lot of the time it's not exclusively, but it's often held on religious grounds. Many people who are opposed to abortion are opposed because of their religious beliefs, which of course is their right. But I think we, especially now in this era, and issues not just about abortion, we see in the Supreme Court, we see in the Trump administration, more and more cries of religious liberty that are used to attack the rights of other people who may not have the same religion or who may not have any religion. So one thing to say to people is, we live in a country where, there is no state religion, and some people are going to disagree with you. Now, going further, what can be said, I don't want to take too much time here, is that if you do not believe in abortion, why do you not join with people who do believe in abortion to support birth control, to support services that would enable people to have the children they want? Most abortion patients, about 75%, are poor. Some of them themselves don't necessarily believe in abortion, but they don't have enough money to support a child, or in many cases, another child. What many social scientists have done is examine the voting records of so-called pro-life legislators. And overwhelmingly, the same people who are against abortion are also against any kind of social welfare programs, any kind of provisions to support people in having the children they want. So there's just this phenomenal, from my point of view, hypocrisy there. So what I would say to people who don't like abortion, well, then support people's ability to have the families they want.
Well said. David, what can you add?
I think a lot of what Carole said, and I mean, there's some extent to which you're not going to change people's minds. This is an issue where people who believe abortion is murder, I'm not going to be able to say anything to change their minds. What I can say is that abortion providers should be able to practice their legal profession without fear of being harassed and targeted and possibly even killed. And usually I can get people to agree to that. All but the extremists believe that. And so I can highlight the ways that abortion providers and abortion clinics are harassed. And maybe for people who have a little more of a libertarian streak, where they say, okay, I don't believe in abortion, but I'm not going to stop someone else from getting an abortion. Or I want to make sure that the reality is people are going to get abortions no matter what. Even if it's illegal, people are going to get abortions. And I want to make sure that those people are safe and healthy and don't have any serious consequences because of what they feel they have to do to live their lives. And so maybe people who are against abortion, you can convince them that, yeah, that's your belief, but the reality of our world is that people get abortions, and we have to make sure they do so safely. And all the data shows that when the state gets involved to try and restrict abortion, it's less safe, it's more costly, it's more burdensome, and there are worse outcomes: health, financial, socioeconomic, family care. The outcomes are much worse. So if you can start talking to people about the consequences of imposing their beliefs on other people, maybe that can sway some people. Maybe not to believe that abortion it should be as widely accessible as Carole and I think so, or even as a social good like we think it can be, but that taking their position to an extreme can have some really detrimental effects.
So, I mean, we're not just talking abortion; we're talking safe abortion. I mean, I think and it seems like it's such a ridiculous thing to clarify or distinguish, but I think everybody people who are pro-life are putting abortion all in the same category, that people like you who are promoting abortion are promoting abortion or any kind of abortion, and that's not the truth. And all abortions are not equal. We're talking about
abortion.
Safe. Go ahead.
Yeah, abortion as practiced in the United States is all safe. I mean, there's across the types of abortion and the gestational age, abortion is one of the safest medical procedures out there. It is safer than colonoscopy. It's safer than liposuction. It's much safer than childbirth. And so the complication rate is minuscule for
abortion.
If I
can just add a factoid, researchers have shown a woman is 14 times more likely to die in childbirth than having an abortion. And we are not saying people should not have children, but that just gives you a sense of how safe abortion, as David said, as practice in this country is.
Right. And so when we're talking about abortion, we're talking about all types of abortion as practiced in the United States because it is so safe. To add one more, it's safer than Tylenol, much safer than Tylenol. You're much more likely to die from getting struck by lightning in this country than you are to have a major complication from abortion. This is a very safe medical procedure. And 91% of abortions take place in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. When it is even safer. It's a very short, non-complicated medical procedure, or taking pills at home, and it's minor cramping, similar to having a period. So we're talking
about. Have we lost David?
David, have we lost you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, now we can.
Yeah, all I was saying was we're talking about a very safe medical procedure.
So when does it turn not safe?
It turns not safe when the state interferes and makes it difficult for women to access, because then people resort to things beyond standard medical care. The risk is not as severe now as it was, say, 30, 40 years ago, because people are turning to medical pills that they can get online. But even some of those pills might not be what people advertise. Or they start doing things outside of standard medical care. They find someone to assist them with an abortion who's not a medical practitioner in any way, and might use risky means. And again, we saw more of this in the 60s and early 70s than we see now. But that's what makes abortion unsafe, is when the state interferes and makes it women delay and seek out other care that is not standard medical care. Abortion as standard practiced standard medical care today, again, across gestational age and across types of abortion, is safe.
And how easy is it to get an abortion?
Depends where you live. I mean, it depends on your zip code. California, New York, Illinois, many clinics. In some places on the West Coast, San Francisco, Oregon, Washington, there's actually an oversupply of providers. Once you get to the Midwest and to many of the southern states, it becomes much more difficult. I mean, one thing we haven't addressed yet, and really David's the expert on this, but should the current Supreme Court, that now has 6 members who are known to be opposed to Roe, should abortion be overturned and left to the states, we're going to see even more difficulties than we have now. Our book, Obstacle Course, really details the difficulties that many abortion patients have and not just paying for the abortion, which we knew would be the case before we started this book, but we didn't realize, even though both of us have been in this field for years, we didn't realize how much of a struggle it was for many women just to get to a clinic. I mean, there's states in the Midwest that have only one clinic. People travel for hours, and should Roe be overturned, it's just going to be that much harder.
Well, I want to talk more to you about that, but we have a question on the chat that I think is really important to read. Okay, so here I go. So I'm a Catholic, but pro-choice. Up until late stages of pregnancy, what is your opinion of Virginia Governor Ralph Northam saying, and I quote, "The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and family desired. The child has already been delivered at this point. Why decide then?" Do you understand? Okay. Carole? David, either one.
Okay. I mean, I'll start, then David can go. I remember that incident very well. It was the governor of Virginia, who she's referring to, himself is a physician, I think a pediatric neurologist, if I'm remembering correctly. That was a classic case of a very complicated issue, being boiled down to a few words. I mean, I'm not criticizing the governor, but I believe what he was getting at. And this is very difficult for many people to accept, but some pregnancies go horribly, horribly wrong. I mean, there are only about 1 and 1.5% of abortions take place after 20 weeks. But those abortions that do take place often are for really heartbreaking reasons. They're often wanted pregnancy, but the fetus doesn't develop a brainstem properly, or his or her organs are outside of the body. Sometimes you do not know what kind of quality of life, or even life itself, some of the abortions done very late in pregnancy. A fetus is delivered, now an infant, but that infant may only live for a couple weeks or a couple months, or maybe even a few hours. And I think what the governor was trying to get across, if I can speak for him, which I realize is tricky, I think what he was trying to convey is that we often don't know. There's often a lot of ambiguity in these very, very difficult cases. Maybe the child can survive for a while, maybe he can't, maybe the child will be in horrible pain. I've heard that often from doctors and reading about these cases. So that there has to be a very difficult, heartbreaking conversation with the family. Do you want a child resuscitated who will only know horrible pain for the next week or two before he or she dies anyway? I think that's what the governor was getting at, and it was a very complicated situation that has been taken out of context. And I understand why your caller is confused by this. David, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think confusion is the right word, because we're confusing two different things. Abortion is something completely different than end-of-life care. And end-of-life care may come for someone who's an hour old because they have conditions that are incompatible with life. And parents are put into this terrible position of having to make the decision of how best to manage end-of-life care for a newborn. And that is a very complicated, conflicting ethical decision to make between them and their physician and the care team. But that's a totally different question than abortion. Once there's a delivery, there's abortion. It's not abortion. Now it's end-of-life care for someone who's struggling because of whatever condition they have. And so to me, it sounds like I don't remember the specifics of what the governor was saying. I do remember that people have taken it out of context. What the governor was talking about is end-of-life care. And we're not talking about a 95-year-old. We're talking about a 1 hour old. But the reality of our species is that some people who are born live an hour or less because it's, there's a lot that can go wrong. And sometimes when it does, you're faced with these incredibly difficult situations. Do you provide more care so that the baby can live for another hour? Or do you let the baby pass away without any extra care? These are really complicated decisions, but they're completely separate from the question of abortion.
Yeah, I could see that. And I can see a huge difference in how we protest against sort of one as opposed to another. I can't see the protesting for that. And as you said, Carole, if a pregnancy is 20 weeks, I mean, it's usually a wanted pregnancy unless somebody doesn't really know they're pregnant.
Or they've had trouble finding an abortion clinic and raising the money because of all the restrictions we talk about in our book, right? People who are delayed, not everyone, but often people are delayed because of medical conditions where they might not know they're pregnant, or a medical condition that is revealed halfway through pregnancy, either for themselves or for the pregnancy they're carrying, or because they've been trying to get an abortion, but the clinic is not able to see them because they don't have the money, or the doctor is not available for the next couple weeks, or because they have to jump through all these hoops that the state puts in their way. And so delay is, I think that there's this myth out there that people who take a long time to get an abortion, into the 20 weeks or 22 weeks, do it because they're irresponsible. And that's just not the case. They do it because life throws curveballs in people's way all the time. And sometimes those curveballs are manageable and other times they're not. And sometimes they make you delay in ways you don't want to. And that's just the reality of abortion patients who seek abortions later in pregnancy.
Thank you for that. And I want to thank SG on our chat for that question. And please feel free, everyone, if you have a question, a comment, a story, you are more than welcome to share it. There's no judgment here. I mean, there are things, I am not the expert when it comes to this conversation, but we have two experts. So I'm here to help facilitate the questions that I would want to know. So, and maybe what you want to know too. But if I don't hit your question or I don't hit your comment, then please just call in 919-518-9773 or join us in our chat. Feel free to write it in there. And also on Skype at Computers 2K Voice. But this is a really important conversation that we're having. This is a conversation that, it means a lot to all of us, our public health. This is very important. And you can't not, we can do something to face it. And the more we face it, the more we understand it, the difference we can make for ourselves and everyone around us. So it's very important. So I know we have this conversation going around about what's going to happen, about Roe versus Wade, now with the court and how it's situated. What do you think? And when do you think it's going to come up? I mean, there's so much going on now. And, we've seen the justices dealing with some things that were even shocking lately because of the combination of who they are. So when do you think this conversation's coming up? How is it going to come up? I mean, what do you tell us? So, either one of you start. I usually start with
David.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court now, with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the addition of Amy Coney Barrett, is a very different Supreme Court than it was just 5 months ago when it decided its most recent abortion decision. And so now we have 6 Republicans and 3 Democrats on the Supreme Court. All 6 of the Republicans have indicated their opposition to abortion rights. It's just a question of how far they're willing to go. At least a couple of them, Justices Thomas and Alito, have indicated they want to overturn Roe v. Wade. The question is the other 4. Do they want to overturn Roe, or do they just want to give states more freedom to restrict abortion? And that is what we don't know. We fear, Carole and I fear, people who we work with and talk to fear that all 6 of them want to ultimately overturn Roe v. Wade. But we don't know that. And we won't know that until they start taking abortion cases in their new configuration and then deciding those cases and how far they want to go. So right now, as they've been deciding cases related to the election, which you were referring to, Marilyn, they have been considering whether to take a case out of Mississippi, with Mississippi having banned abortions after 15 weeks. Now, Roe v. Wade and the cases that followed it said that states can ban abortion at viability, and that's around 23 or 24 weeks. Mississippi has banned abortion at 15 weeks, and the lower courts struck that down as unconstitutional because it has to be under Roe and the cases that followed it. Mississippi has asked the Supreme Court to hear that case, and the Supreme Court's been sitting on it. Just even the decision whether they're going to hear that case. They have scheduled a conference. They schedule weekly conferences to decide what cases they're going to take. And they've pushed this one off, I think the last I checked was 5 or 6 times. So we don't know what that means. The court doesn't tell us what that means. It just means that they're taking a little while to figure out whether they want to hear this case. And if they decide to hear it, it would be heard maybe next year or the year after. But this is the first case that's really close to being possibly heard by this newly configured court. And what it could do is use this case to say, okay, well, it's no longer that viability is the important point. We're going to allow 15-week bans on abortion. Well, then if you allow 15, what about 12? What about 6? What about all the way back to banning abortion? So it could just be the start, but we don't know yet because the court hasn't taken that case and decided it. But those are the kinds of things we're going to see. Restrictions around the country being challenged all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court eventually deciding to take one or more of those cases, and then in those cases, starting to tell us what this conservative court thinks about Roe. I think it could be a couple years before we get there. I would be surprised myself if the court were to overturn Roe with its first abortion case after Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies. I could be wrong. I've been wrong about predictions a lot. Look at our president now. I didn't think he was going to be president in 2016, but he won. I'm wrong about a lot. But I would be surprised if they take their first abortion case after she dies and overturn Roe. I think that what they are more likely to do is bit by bit take back different parts of the right and make it so that states can make it more and more difficult for people to have an abortion, and then maybe ultimately get to the point where abortion can be made illegal. But the practical difference for a lot of people trying to access healthcare, it's not going to be much. I mean, yeah, they can't be thrown in jail for getting an abortion, but they can be made to wait longer, pay more, their insurance can be more difficult. The state can try and interfere with the decision in all sorts of different ways. And I think more restrictions are going to be allowed, and that's going to happen soon.
Carole?
Well, just to add to what David said, it's not just it's going to be harder for those who want abortion. It's going to be harder for providers to offer abortion because of the various restrictions that we've written about. Clinics have been closing. It's hard to keep up with the numbers, but there are less. there are less clinics now than there were several years ago, and several years ago there weren't that many. I mean, just to give you a context here, there are thousands of so-called crisis pregnancy centers. These are what David and I refer to as fake clinics. People going to them think that they have names very similar to abortion clinics, but they're anti-abortion. If you get in there thinking you're going to get an abortion, they try to talk you out of it and scare the hell out of you. Anyway, there's thousands of these. In some red states, they get huge amounts of taxpayer-funded support, and of course, abortion clinics don't. So, and there's just not that many, and many of them, and as we've already said, abortion clinics, abortion patients disproportionately among the poorest women in our society. 50% below the federal poverty line, another 25% just above it. So they can't pay that much. So many abortion clinics operate very close to the margins. It's just hard for many of them to keep going. So, I mean, that's another obstacle that we foresee in the years ahead, that it will be harder and harder for clinics to remain open.
And once Biden becomes the actual president after January, can he load up the court a little to make this a different scenario?
I'll defer to David on that.
David?
So it's going to be a challenge for him to have the impact. So there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. There's been talk of the Democrats being able to expand the court to add justices. And that's a long shot. Like, it's, I think of it as like me ever living on Mars. It's not going to happen. It's especially not going to happen if the Democrats don't control the Senate. So Joe Biden won't be able to do anything with the court if the Georgia special election in January doesn't go in favor of the Democrats. But even if he does, even if they do, that would require the Democrats to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate, which there's been no indication that there's enough votes for that. And then to add justices to the court, for a court that's had 9 justices for about 150 years. The 9 is not magic. It's not written in the Constitution. That can be changed. And there's been a long history before the 1860s and 70s of 8 justices, 10 justices, 4, 5, 7. It's bounced around. But since then, we've had 9. And so you would have to convince every Democratic senator, including the ones who are more moderate, to change the number of justices on the court. That just seems so unlikely to me. Barring that, he would have to wait for a retirement or a death. Currently, the 2 oldest Republicans are Justices Thomas and Alito. And I believe Alito's in his late 60s and Thomas is in his early 70s. So they're not that old.
Stephen Breyer is.
Right, that's the thing. Stephen Breyer, one of the Democrats, is in his mid 80s, I believe, 84. And RBG was 87 when she passed. So the Republicans have young justices on their side. So, Thomas could be on the bench another 15 years, and he's the oldest of the Republicans. So, for Donald Trump got 3.
Looks like David froze.
Lost him. Oh, David, come on back.
While we're waiting for him,
Go ahead.
If I may, I'd like to add
sure.
to the Biden.
And then we have another question from SG on the chat.
Okay, but just quick, while we're waiting for David.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. I don't think Biden can add to the court, but he can. I mean, and David and I so far in this conversation have been giving a pretty depressing view of the state of things. But Biden, it really matters to have a Democratic president. he can do some executive orders. He can undo the global gag rule as well as the domestic gag rule. These are rules put in by Republican presidents, typically taken off by Democratic presidents. United States foreign aid will now again be able to go to groups that, among other things, promote abortion. In the United States, Planned Parenthood will again be able to get Title X funding, not for abortions, but for birth control. And they were not able to during the Trump administration because they had to agree to never mention the option of an abortion. And they didn't agree to that. From my perspective, one of the most important things we'll see in the Biden administration is the appointment of officials who are pro-choice. The new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, he is now the Attorney General of California. He's pro-choice. He's gone after anti-abortion extremists. Biden will be able to appoint people in the federal bureaucracy, like the FDA commissioner, and that's very important, like whoever runs CDC, more obscure appointments that most people have never heard of, the DASPA, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Population Affairs, not a household word, but that individual has a tremendous authority over issues like emergency contraception, like public funding of birth control. So even though the situation with the court is very scary, the appointments that Biden is able to make will in fact make some things better. And finally, both President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, both of them are on record, she much longer than he, as opposing the Hyde Amendment. That's an amendment that prevents any public funding from going to support abortion care. So, I mean, there are reasons to be absolutely hopeful relative to what we just had with the Pence-Trump administration with the Biden administration.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I'm like, okay, then what's your work about? Because I know in some of the work I'm listening to about the opioid epidemic. I mean, if we can get out clean syringes, we're doing good. It's not about stopping it. It's about, offering, information, offering tools that are going to keep people from dying. Kind of the same thing. So, okay, David, are you back with us now? Good.
I'm back. I apologize. It's the dangers of having multiple kids on a Zoom school at the same time. Yeah. And sometimes the internet goes. But so I guess I don't know what else Carole said. I didn't hear. But my point being, it's going to be hard to do anything about the Supreme Court. But Biden could affect the lower courts, because it's very possible he has 0 appointments to the Supreme Court. But he will have appointments to the lower courts, and those matter. Mm-hmm. So appointing people who are pro-choice to the lower courts will make a difference. And it all, it comes down to what kinds of things, if the Republicans continue to have control over the Senate, what kinds of things, what kind of appointments Mitch McConnell allows Biden to make. Because in theory, Biden could appoint all sorts of people to the lower courts, and Mitch McConnell could decide, I'm not going to have a vote on a single one of them. And that would be unprecedented, but so was refusing to have a vote on Merrick Garland in 2016, when there was an opening that President Obama could have filled. So we don't know what's going to happen in terms of appointments in the coming years. And a lot will depend on the outcome in Georgia. And then if the outcome in Georgia goes against against the Democrats, what the Republicans, how obstructionist they want to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of things that are going to be telling very soon. So I want to go with SG's next question. So you described some circumstances in which I agree with if the child was born with obvious problems like you described with organs outside body. But here's a big what. What if child was born healthy? When I was in the hospital with my baby 25 years ago, I remembered seeing parents whose child was premature, no bigger than my hand. Many of those children make it to live normal lives. Thank you for answering prior question. It makes a little more sense. So I don't see the question exactly. Do you get a question out of there? Like, do you think that's, go ahead.
I don't see a, oh, David, if you understand the question, go ahead.
I mean, the best I can make from it is there's some sense in this person's mind that there are premature infants who are born that parents are then deciding not to give care to and are then killing. And that, again, is completely separate from abortion. Once we've got a delivery, it's not an abortion. Now we're talking about
murder.
We're talking about murder or infanticide or end of life care. And those decisions are outside of my expertise. Those are things that doctors deal with, neonatologists deal with, and ethicists at hospitals deal with. And there are a lot of gray areas from what I understand, and a lot of really difficult decisions that are made. But asking the wrong person here, at least from my knowledge, once you've got a delivery, it's not abortion.
It sounds to me, and I love that SJ has been part of this. It sounds to me that a lot of people group a lot of things under the umbrella of abortion.
Well, I think that's been, we've had people like Donald Trump and others who try to who say there's abortion after birth. They use that language, and that's just nonsensical. There's no such thing. And so I think that there's been a lot of talk that has led people to believe that there's this after birth care that is somehow part of an abortion, that abortion providers are delivering babies and then killing them. And that's an abortion. That's just that's crazy. That's not a thing. It is not abortion care. It is not medical care. But that is part of how it's being talked about these days. But it's just, I can't emphasize enough. That is not medical care that abortion providers give. Abortion providers have standard methods by which they perform abortions on someone who is pregnant, not just went through birth. And that is the care that we are talking about.
I want, well, you know what? We keep on, having more and more deeper conversations. So I'm glad that we have this chance. I know that there's things going on now because of COVID. How is that interfering?
Well, I had the opportunity recently to talk to many abortion clinic directors about COVID, and like all healthcare, it's been very challenging. It was especially challenging right at the beginning. Right around the March when awareness of this pandemic first hit and everything shut down. What happened in a number of states, disproportionately red states, in fact, all red states, was that the governors, for example, in Texas and in, I believe maybe in Florida, said, okay, only essential health care, abortion is not essential. And there were lawsuits, and the abortion clinics were allowed to open, and they have opened, and abortion care continues to this day. It's different, obviously. New protocols, people's coming to the clinic typically wait in their cars in the clinic, don't go inside. In places where it is legally allowed, a lot of telemedicine, taking health histories over on video. In other words, abortion clinics, like every other healthcare facility, has tried to cope with the reality of that when you have face-to-face interaction, if you can possibly avoid it, you should avoid it. Well, one very interesting and important result of COVID has been to make medication abortion. David alluded to it earlier, to make medication abortion very, very important. Medication abortion involves, as David suggested earlier, taking 2 different pills, and then in the old days, if you went to a clinic, you would then go home and you would essentially have a miscarriage. So there's a lot of medication abortion going on, and that's helped enormously. It's helped keep patients safe. It's helped keep staff safe. But once again, we see politics interfering. A very complicated legal case that's been going on for years, but that has been decided by a judge in Maryland in a very good direction, has said the pills can be mailed to patients. These drugs were under an FDA ruling that said you had to go to the clinic to get them. Now, in states where this is possible, now you have a video conference with a doctor at the clinic. They ascertain that you are an appropriate candidate, and if you are, you can be mailed the pills. But this is happening only in certain states, because other states, and this goes exactly to what David has talked about before, states have put in unnecessary restrictions saying, no, you can't do telemedicine. No, you can't mail these pills, even though a judge said you could. So anyway, bottom line, COVID has made things harder, as it has for all healthcare, but healthcare goes on. The abortion providers have stepped up to the plate. From what people have told me, very few staff members have quit. So your listeners should know that abortion care goes on.
Except in one state, South Dakota. Yeah. South Dakota has not been able to provide abortions since the start of the pandemic.
What was it like there before the pandemic?
It was difficult. South Dakota was probably the worst state for access in the country. There was one clinic. It didn't go that far into pregnancy. It only was open once a week, and the doctors had to fly in from elsewhere. There was a 72-hour waiting period. You have to see the same doctor on day 1 and then again for this procedure after waiting. So it was really difficult to get an abortion in South Dakota even before COVID. Now it's impossible because there's no clinic operating in South Dakota. So that is the only state that has no clinic right now. And for, again, we're not talking about a very populous part of the country, obviously, but for the people who live there who need abortion care, now they have to drive that much further. And those states are large. So getting to another state, North Dakota or Minnesota, Nebraska, that's difficult.
Well, I like pro-choice, a lot of things. So let's hold you up your book again. And where can they get it? Go ahead. Let's do a twinsy. You got one too, David?
Yeah, I got it right next to you.
Okay, hold it up. Oh, yeah. Perfect.
This book can be gotten from the usual places. Reasons we don't entirely understand. On Amazon, it's half price. It's like $11 and something. So that's probably the most cost-effective way. They can also get it from University of California Press, from other bookstores, but for the economically minded, Amazon actually makes it available.
And it has stories in it. It has stories of women, who have, wanted to have an abortion, have gone for an abortion, and things that have happened. So it's an interest, right? It's an interesting.
Yeah, we have stories from both patients and providers, because what we wanted to tell the story of was two things: how the providers out there, how committed they are to the work to work through all of these restrictions and still provide excellent care. So we have their stories, and then we have patient stories of how they are able to get through all these restrictions on the patient side of things and still get care. as many providers told us, patients will do whatever it takes to get an abortion. If someone is pregnant and doesn't want to be, they are going to walk through fire to stop being pregnant. And so the stories of patients walking through everything that they have to get through to get an abortion, when it should be easy and accessible, fill the book.
Right. Shouldn't be such desperation.
Right.
Hold on one second. Amnon, you got my books up there? There we go. In Just One Afternoon, Listening to the Hearts of Men, then Twins and Millennials, then most recently People Impacted by Opioid Addiction, and now I'm working on Black Fathers. And
I'm sorry, say that again. You're working on what?
Black Fathers.
Uh-huh.
Listening to the hearts of Black fathers. And their insights into people and their stories, just like, some of the stories that I know you have in your book, because that's how you
great.
See the reality.
Congratulations. Yeah. You're a very productive person.
Well, I have a lot of stigmas and judgments to dispel. I'm on a mission.
Okay.
That we get rid of the stigmas.
That's good.
And the judgment.
Stigma is a very big deal in the abortion world. So.
It is it's a big deal. I mean, stigmas. They're based on, like this, like this person who's on our chat now. I mean, I'm 25 years ago. I'm sure that there were things were different then, right? There were things that were different when I was a new mom, and people were, 40 years ago, and people having abortions, and some things just stay in people's minds. And no matter what you do, even what we were talking about earlier, with, abortion and, after somebody actually gives birth, it's not abortion, but everything is clumped together, and it's hard to break through that. It's hard to break through, perceptions, and, people have a lock on that stuff, and we've got to get past all of that. We have to get past that into the reality of things, and not the fake historical or the historical. I mean, doctors today, I'm sure, are a lot better than they were, 40 years ago in giving an abortion too, because of the work that people like you are doing. People are more accountable, right? So
I mean, abortion is, as David has said before, is incredibly safe. As proud as I am of the research that David and I do, we do not take credit for that. The medical wing of the pro-choice movement are incredibly dedicated, thoughtful, smart people, and they have, in fact, in your state, North Carolina, you have really one of the great pioneers of abortion care, Dr. David Grimes. I mean, he's, I believe, now retired, but he for many years was at UNC, and he really was a leader in developing and teaching them to others of very safe techniques.
Well, I appreciate your helping to educate us.
Well, that's
vital. That is vital. Anyway, we are out of time. This was really fast, zippy kind of show today, but the information was priceless and delivered in a very, tangible, understanding kind of way. Carole, did you want to say something?
No, I just want to thank you for having us.
It's my pleasure. David?
Pleasure to talk to you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Marilyn.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Get their book. Be open-minded. Listen. If it's not for you, then don't have an abortion, just like you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, thank you all for being here. We love you, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful, safe week. Bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.